Have you ever felt invisible, judged by your job, your uniform, your station in life? This is the story of a woman who was seen as nothing more than a servant, a ghost meant to refill glasses and clear plates. A ruthless billionaire, in a cruel attempt to entertain his wealthy friends, decided to make her the night's laughing stock. He forced her into the spotlight, demanding she perform for a crowd that had already dismissed her. But he made one colossal mistake. He sat her in front of a piano. He thought he was about to humiliate a waitress. He had no idea he was about to unleash a master. What happened next wasn't just a performance. It was a reckoning that shattered reputations and exposed the truth that genius can be found in the most unexpected of places. The city of New York glittered below a sprawling galaxy of captured stars, but for Eleanor Vance, it was just a backdrop. From the 80th floor penthouse of the newly erected Apex Tower, the city was a silent movie, its frantic energy muted by triple-paned glass. Ellie felt a similar silence within herself. It had been 4 years since she'd truly listened to the music, 4 years since the roaring silence had begun. Tonight, she wore a starched black uniform with a crisp white apron. Her name tag read Eleanor, but to the guests drifting through the opulent space, she was an interchangeable part of the scenery, a phantom with a tray of canapes. She moved with an efficiency born of necessity. Her steps measured her expression, a polite, vacant mask. This was her life now, a cycle of shifts at affairs of elegance, the high-end catering company that serviced the city's elite. It paid the rent on her tiny Brooklyn apartment, kept the lights on, and most importantly, it was quiet. It demanded nothing of her soul. Her soul had been given enough. It had been shattered on a rain-slicked stretch of the I-95, along with the bones in her left hand, and the life of the only man who had ever understood her. Professor Albright, her mentor, her champion, her second father. The memory was a physical thing, a phantom pain that shot from her knuckles to her shoulder whenever she saw a grand piano. And the one in this penthouse was a monster. A Fazioli F278 Concert Grand. It wasn't just a piano, it was a statement. Polished to a black liquid mirror, it dominated the main salon, its lid propped open like a raven's wing, revealing the pristine, terrifying geometry of its keys. Ellie had made a point to give it a wide berth all evening, tracing a path along the far walls, her eyes averted. But she could feel its presence, a low hum of potential that vibrated in her bones, a siren song from a life she had drowned long ago. The host of the party, Alistair Finch, was a man carved from the sharpest edges of new money, a tech mogul who'd made his billions in data analytics. He possessed the unshakable arrogance of a man who believed his net worth was a direct measure of his human worth. He was young, handsome, in a severe sort of way, with a jaw that seemed permanently clenched, and eyes that assessed everything and everyone for its value and utility. Tonight's gala was a carefully orchestrated power play, an attempt to cement his place among the city's old money cultural elite. He hadn't just invited investors, he'd courted art critics, museum board members, and symphony patrons. Ellie watched him work the room, his laughter a sharp, metallic bark. He was particularly focused on a small, powerful group near the fireplace, a formidable woman named Isabella Rossi, who owned 3 of the most influential contemporary art galleries in Soho, and an older distinguished gentleman, Mr. Harrison Sterling, a long-serving board member of the Juilliard School. Alistair wanted their validation more than he wanted another $1 billion. He wanted their world to accept him. Ellie's job was simple: be invisible. She refilled a champagne flute for a woman dripping in diamonds, murmuring a quiet pleasure, when the woman didn't even bother to look up. She cleared a plate of half-eaten oysters, her stomach churning at the casual waste. This was the world Professor Albright had been preparing her for, but on the other side of the velvet rope. "Your talent will open these doors, Ellie," he used to say, his eyes twinkling. "You'll play in halls like this for people like this." A sudden sharp gasp cut through the polite murmur of the party. Ellie turned to see a young waiter, a new hire named Leo, stumble. A tray of ruby-red cocktails went flying a scarlet arc of disaster, painting itself across the pristine, white dress of Isabella Rossi. Silence fell. The air crackled. Alistair Finch's face, which had been a mask of charming bonhomie, contorted into a snarl of pure fury. He was across the room in seconds. "You incompetent fool!" He hissed at Leo, his voice a low, dangerous weapon. Leo was pale, trembling, stammering apologies that died in his throat. Isabella, to her credit, was trying to be gracious, dabbing at her ruined dress with a napkin. "It's quite all right, accidents happen." But Alistair wouldn't have it. This was a flaw in his perfect evening, an imperfection he couldn't tolerate. "Get out. Get out. You're fired. Affairs of elegance will hear about this. You'll never work in this city again." Leo looked utterly crushed. Ellie felt a pang of sympathy, a flash of anger at the sheer, unnecessary cruelty. She moved forward instinctively, a bottle of sparkling water and a clean cloth in hand. "Sir, if I may, club soda can help lift the stain immediately." Alistair's venomous gaze snapped to her. "And who are you, Eleanor, sir?" "From the catering company." He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her name tag with a dismissive sneer. He was about to wave her away when his chief of staff, a perpetually anxious man named Peterson, scurried over and whispered something in his ear. Peterson was holding a tablet displaying the staff manifest from the catering company. It was standard for high-security events. Under each name were basic details, and for some, a line for special skills or hobbies for emergency staffing needs. Alistair's eyes lit up with a new, far more dangerous kind of malice. A slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted a new, more interesting toy to break. "Eleanor," he said, his voice now dangerously smooth. He gestured towards the Fazioli grand piano. "Peterson here tells me you have a musical background." Juilliard was at pre-college program. Ellie's blood ran cold. It was on her application from years ago, a ghost of a credential she'd never bothered to remove. "That was a very long time ago, sir. I don't play anymore." "Nonsense," Alistair boomed, projecting to the silent watching crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have some hidden talent among our excellent staff tonight." A few guests tittered, unsure if this was part of the show. "Our lovely Eleanor here is a classically trained pianist. What a charming rustic touch for our little soiree." He was mocking her. The word rustic was a dagger designed to frame her as a quaint little peasant, a barnyard animal being trotted out for the amusement of her betters. Ellie's heart hammered against her ribs. "Sir, I can't. I really can't." "Oh, I insist," Alistair said, his smile tightening. His hand shot out and clamped onto her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. It wasn't a request. It was a command. "Don't you want to help your clumsy friend Leo play us a little tune? And I might just forget his disastrous incompetence." He was leveraging Leo's job, his livelihood, against her. It was a checkmate. The room was watching. Mr. Sterling from Juilliard was watching, his expression unreadable. Isabella Rossi looked uncomfortable. This was a nightmare. Alistair was backing her towards the piano, his hand a manacle on her arm. The polished black monster grew larger and larger, a gaping maw, ready to swallow her whole. The keys, a black and white grin, seemed to mock her. Every instinct screamed at her to run. The ghosts of the past were clawing at her. The screech of tires, the shattering of glass, the final discordant crash of a life ending. But the sight of Leo's terrified face and the cold, hard reality of her own precarious finances held her feet to the floor. She had no choice. She was trapped. Alistair Finch was forcing her to confront the one thing she had spent 4 years running from, and he was doing it for sport. The distance from the edge of the Persian rug to the piano bench was perhaps 20 feet. To Ellie, it felt like a mile-long walk across a frozen lake, the ice groaning and cracking with every step. The low murmur of the party had died, completely replaced by a thick, expectant silence that pressed in on her from all sides. It was the silence of a courtroom right before the verdict is read, the silence of an arena before the lions are released. Alistair still had his hand on her arm, propelling her forward. His touch felt like a brand. He was a showman parading his prize. "Come now, Eleanor." "Don't be shy," he announced to the room, his voice dripping with condescending charm. "Let's have a little something from you, a little Mozart, a nursery rhyme. Whatever you can remember." The layered insults were deliberate. Whatever you can remember. He was painting her as a dilettante, someone who took a few lessons as a child. He was setting the stage for her failure, priming the audience to laugh when she inevitably stumbled through a clumsy rendition of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Ellie could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on her back. They weren't just watching, they were dissecting. They saw her ill-fitting uniform, the slight fraying at the cuff her service-worn shoes. They saw a waitress, a nobody, a prop in Alistair Finch's grand performance of his own importance. She could hear their unspoken thoughts. How bizarre. Is this some kind of joke? The poor girl looks terrified. She risked a glance at the little cluster of power players Alistair had been so desperate to impress. Isabella Rossi was frowning, a line of disapproval creasing her brow. She looked at Alistair, then at Ellie, and her discomfort was plain. But it was the gaze of Harrison Sterling that truly unnerved Ellie, the man from Juilliard. His face was a mask of stoic neutrality, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, were locked onto her. He wasn't looking at a waitress, he was looking at a musician. It was a gaze she hadn't felt in years, the appraising, knowing look of a connoisseur. It was somehow more terrifying than Alistair's naked contempt. Her mind was a maelstrom of panic, the scent of jasmine from a nearby floral arrangement, mixed with the faint, cloying smell of expensive perfume, and for a split second, it transported her. The smell of the air freshener in Professor Albright's old Volvo, the scent of the lilies he always kept on his piano, the coppery scent of blood after the crash. "Breathe, Alara," his voice echoed in her memory, using his pet name for her. "The music is already inside you. You just have to let it breathe." But she couldn't breathe. Her lungs were encased in ice. Alistair finally released her at the piano bench. The sudden absence of his grip made her feel unsteady, as if she might collapse. She stood frozen before the instrument, this gleaming black beast. It was a Fazioli, she realized again, with a fresh wave of nausea. Not a Steinway, which was the standard choice of the rich and showy. A Fazioli was a musician's choice. Its action was lighter, its tone richer, more complex. Owning a Fazioli didn't just mean you had money, it meant you had taste, or at least you'd hired someone who did. This piano was an artist's instrument, and she was about to defile it. She sank onto the rich leather of the bench. The seat was still warm. Someone had been playing it earlier, a hired professional, no doubt, who had played light, unobtrusive jazz as the guests arrived. He would have played with effortless grace. She, on the other hand, felt like an imposter, a blasphemer at the altar. She looked down at her hands. They were a waitress's hands now. A small, pale scar cut a diagonal line across her left knuckle, a permanent reminder of the surgery. Her nails were cut short, practical. Her skin was dry from soap and sanitizer. These weren't the hands of a concert pianist anymore. They were the hands of a worker. Alistair leaned down his voice, a conspiratorial whisper for her ears, only though his smug grin was for the whole room. Just play something simple, dear. No one's expecting a miracle. He straightened up. A round of applause for Eleanor's courage. Everyone. A scattered lukewarm applause rippled through the room. It felt like dirt being shoveled onto a coffin. Ellie stared at the 88 keys. They seemed to stretch into infinity, a stark, unforgiving landscape of black and white. For 4 years she had avoided this. She'd cross the street to avoid walking past a music store. She'd change the radio station if a classical piece came on. The piano was a tomb, and buried inside it was the girl she used to be, the girl with the boundless future, the girl who believed in magic. Playing now felt like robbing that grave. Her right hand trembled as she lifted it. The phantom pain in her left flared a dull, aching throb that was more memory than reality. The doctors had said she'd make a full recovery physically. Her bones had healed, her tendons had mended, but they couldn't see the real injury, the one that had severed the connection between her heart and her hands. She could hear Alistair's soft chuckle from behind her. He thought he had won. In a few moments she would plink out a few wrong notes, blush a deep crimson, and scurry away in shame. His point would be made. He was powerful enough to command people to make them dance, for his amusement, to humiliate them at will. Leo would keep his job, and Ellie would return to the shadows broken. She closed her eyes. The faces of the judgmental guests swam in the darkness. But then another face appeared. Professor Albright's. Not as he was in the end, but as he was in his study, sitting across from her, at his beloved Bechstein, his eyes full of warmth and fierce pride. "Don't play the notes, Alara," he was saying. "Play the story. What is the composer telling you? What are you telling the world? What was her story now? Was it one of fear, of defeat? Was she going to let a man like Alistair Finch write the final chapter? Was her legacy? And Professor Albright's going to be a timid, fumbled nursery rhyme in a rich man's penthouse? A flicker of something hot and defiant sparked in the cold cavern of her chest. It was an emotion she hadn't felt in years. Rage. A pure, cleansing fire. Rage at Alistair. Rage at the laughing guests. Rage at the universe for its cruel, random whims. And most of all, rage at herself for letting the fear win for so long. She opened her eyes. The keys no longer looked like a grin. They looked like a weapon. A path. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the first full breath she'd taken all night. She let it out slowly, the way Professor Albright had taught her, pushing out the fear and the noise. She placed her waitress's hands, over the keys. They felt alien and yet perfectly familiar, like coming home to a house you thought had burned to the ground. The room held its breath, waiting for the joke to land. Alistair Finch crossed his arms, a triumphant smirk plastered on his face. Ellie knew what she had to play. It wasn't Mozart. It wasn't simple. It was a storm. It was a howl of grief and a declaration of war. It was Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. The silence in the room had become a physical entity, a heavy blanket that absorbed all sound and thought. Everyone was watching, waiting for the punchline. Alistair Finch stood like a Roman emperor in a bespoke suit, ready to give the thumbs down. Ellie's fingers hovered over the ivory, trembling slightly. This was the precipice, the moment before the plunge. Her mind flashed with a final desperate protest. "You can't. Your left hand is weak. You haven't practiced in 4 years. You'll fail. You'll dishonor his memory." But beneath the fear, the fire of her rage was building. It burned away the doubt, cauterized the old wounds. Professor Albright didn't raise a coward. He raised a musician. Her right hand descended. The first note of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 is not a grand chord or a triumphant fanfare. It's a question. A single soft, questioning largo that hangs in the air full of sorrow and uncertainty. Ellie played it with a lifetime of stored-up hesitation. The note emerged from the fazioli, not as a sound made by a hammer striking a string, but as if the piano itself had sighed. It was a sound so pure, so full of melancholic beauty, that it instantly vaporized the cheap comedic tension in the room. Alistair's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. That wasn't the sound of a fumbling amateur. Then the main theme began. A slow, haunting melody that rocks back and forth like a boat on a dark, mournful sea. Ellie played it, not just with technical precision, but with the aching heart of someone who understood its story. Her story. The theme spoke of loss of a beauty that was irrevocably gone. She wasn't just pressing keys. She was transcribing her own grief into the air, making it audible, tangible. The notes were her tears. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the light entertainment they were expecting. This was intimate, raw. It felt like they were intruding on a private confession. The piece began to build. The left hand, her scarred hand, which she had babied and pitied for 4 years, came alive. It moved with a fluid, powerful grace, laying down the harmonic foundation, the turbulent undercurrents beneath the melody. The dormant muscle memory buried under layers of trauma awoke with a roar. Her fingers, which had grown accustomed to the weight of trays and glasses, rediscovered their true purpose. They danced, they struck, they caressed. The music swelled, transitioning from sorrow to a frantic, passionate waltz. Her pace quickened. The complex passages, the dizzying runs and arpeggios that had once been second nature flowed from her as if no time had passed at all. It wasn't perfect. A trained ear might have caught the slightest hint of rust, a minuscule hesitation, but it was played with such ferocious, desperate passion that it transcended perfection. It was alive. It was breathing. It was bleeding. Alistair Finch's face was now a mask of stunned disbelief. The smirk was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. This wasn't happening. The waitress, the prop, was not following the script. She was rewriting it, turning his carefully staged comedy into a profound tragedy, and he was no longer the director. He was just a spectator. Isabella Rossi had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. She was no longer looking at Ellie with pity, but with a kind of reverent shock. And Harrison Sterling. Mr. Sterling had closed his eyes. He wasn't watching anymore. He was listening. His head was tilted slightly, a small, almost imperceptible nod keeping time with the music. A faint, sad smile played on his lips. He knew. He recognized the soul of a true artist. He was hearing not just the music of Chopin, but the unmistakable echo of a Juilliard education, of a prodigious talent that had been lost and was now impossibly being found. The ballade reached its fiery heart, the scherzo-like section. This was where the storm truly broke. Ellie's body was a conduit for the music's fury. She leaned into the piano, her back straight, her movements economical, but filled with power. Her quiet, servile demeanor had evaporated, replaced by the fierce, commanding presence of a concert pianist in her element. She was no longer Eleanor the waitress. She was Alara the musician. Albright had named her for a star. Her hair, which had been pulled back in a severe functional bun, started to come loose, a few strands framing her face, which was now flushed with exertion and emotion. She was no longer seeing the penthouse, the guests, or Alistair. She was seeing the music as Professor Albright had taught her to, as colours, as landscapes, as stories. She saw the rain-slicked highway, the flash of headlights, the world turning upside down. But this time she wasn't a victim in the memory. She was in control. She was taking the chaos, the pain, the ugliness of that moment, and she was forging it into something beautiful, something powerful. The sound she was creating was immense. The Fazioli, an instrument built for the world's greatest concert halls, sang under her command. It wept, it raged, it pleaded, it roared. The sound filled every corner of the vast penthouse, vibrating through the floorboards, rattling the champagne flutes, silencing the city below. The guests were no longer just guests at a party. They were a congregation, and Ellie was at the pulpit, preaching a sermon of furious, heart-breaking beauty. She was approaching the coda, the legendary, terrifying coda of the G minor ballade. It is one of a pianist's most dreaded passages, a torrential, breathtakingly fast explosion of octaves and chords that demands everything an artist has to give strength, speed, precision, and soul. It is the musical equivalent of a final desperate charge into battle. And Ellie charged. Her hands were a blur, a whirlwind of controlled violence across the keys. The pain in her left hand was gone, burned away by adrenaline and purpose. She was playing for her life. She was playing for Leo's job. She was playing for the girl she used to be. Most of all, she was playing for him. For Professor Albright. This was her eulogy 4 years late. This was her testament. The final chords were like thunder, a catastrophic, apocalyptic resolution. She threw her entire body weight into them, driving the sound from the piano with a final cathartic scream. And then silence. The final thunderous chord of the ballade echoed through the penthouse, a sound so immense it seemed to hang in the air, shimmering before slowly dissolving. In its wake, it left a silence even more profound than the one that had preceded the performance. It was a breathless, holy silence, filled with the ghost of the music, the weight of the story she had just told. Ellie's hands fell from the keys, landing softly in her lap. Her chest was heaving, her lungs burning. Sweat beaded on her forehead and trickled down her temples. Her knuckles were white. The world rushed back in a dizzying flood of sensory information. The bright lights, the scent of jasmine, the dozens of faces staring at her, their expressions a mixture of shock, awe, and disbelief. She had done it. She had survived. She had played the storm and come out the other side. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if she had cast a spell over the room, and they were all afraid to break it. They had come expecting a joke, a moment of casual cruelty to chuckle at. Instead, they had witnessed a resurrection. They had heard the sound of a soul returning to itself. Then one person began to clap. It wasn't a polite, perfunctory clap. It was a sharp, deliberate, appreciative sound. Ellie looked up and saw it was Harrison Sterling. The man from Juilliard was on his feet, his stoic mask broken by an expression of profound admiration. He was clapping slowly, respectfully, his eyes locked on hers. His applause wasn't for a waitress, it was for an equal. His action broke the dam. A woman in the front let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Then Isabella Rossi was on her feet, her own applause joining Sterling's. In a wave, the entire room surged to its feet, erupting in a roar of applause that was deafening. It wasn't the lukewarm clapping from before. This was a standing ovation. It was thunderous, genuine, overwhelming. People were cheering, whistling. They weren't applauding a novelty act. They were honoring an artist. Ellie stared out at them, her mind struggling to process the scene. These people who minutes ago had looked through her as if she were made of glass were now on their feet, their faces alight with an emotion she had only ever seen from the stage of a recital hall. She saw the young waiter Leo standing near the service door, his face streaked with tears, clapping harder than anyone. Then her eyes found Alistair Finch. He was the only person in the room who wasn't clapping. He stood frozen, his arms slack at his sides. His face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. Utter gobsmacked shock was warring with the dawning horror of his own miscalculation. The triumphant smirk was a distant memory, replaced by a pale, sickly confusion. He had intended to stage a public humiliation, but the humiliation was now entirely his. He hadn't just failed to mock her. He had, in his ignorance, revealed her to be a diamond in the rough. He had handed her a sword, and she had used it to single-handedly conquer his entire party, stealing the spotlight he so desperately craved. The awe in the room wasn't for him, his wealth, or his penthouse. It was for his waitress. The applause continued, swelling and echoing off the glass walls. But Ellie felt no triumph, no satisfaction. The music had been a shield, a weapon. But now that it was over, the silence rushed back in, and with it, the ghosts. The performance hadn't been a healing. It had been a lancing of a wound. She had ripped off the bandage and exposed the raw, agonizing trauma underneath for all to see. Playing hadn't fixed her. It had simply reminded her of everything she had lost. The joy of creation was inextricably linked to the agony of her grief for Professor Albright. The final chord of the ballad had been a eulogy, and now the funeral was over, leaving only the hollow ache of absence. The applause started to feel like a physical assault, the praise like a violation. They were cheering for her pain. They were applauding a wound she had just ripped open for their entertainment. Panic began to set in cold and sharp. The room was too hot, the air too thick. The admiring faces started to blur, looking grotesque and demanding. She felt a desperate, primal need to flee. She stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs. The room, thinking she was standing to take a bow, cheered even louder. But Ellie didn't bow. She didn't acknowledge them. She couldn't. She turned her back to the stunned audience, her eyes wild with a trapped animal's fear. She saw the service door behind the bar, a small, unassuming exit to the staff corridors. It was her only escape. Without a second glance at Alistair Finch or the adoring crowd, she ran. She pushed past a stunned bartender, her movements clumsy, desperate. She fumbled with the handle of the service door and threw it open, plunging from the glittering, cacophonous salon into the stark, fluorescent-lit silence of the back corridor. She slammed the door shut behind her, cutting off the roar of applause, as if with a knife. The only sound now was her own ragged breathing and the frantic, painful hammering of her own heart. She leaned against the cool metal of the door, sliding down to the floor, and finally, for the first time in 4 years, Eleanor Vance began to sob. She wept for the music, for her mentor, for the girl she had been, and for the woman she was terrified she had just become again. The party, the awe, the humiliation, it was all on the other side of the door. Here in the quiet, sterile hallway, there was only the wreckage. On the other side of the door, the abrupt end of the performance and the performer's shocking exit left a vacuum. The thunderous applause faltered, sputtering into confused murmurs. Guests turned to each other, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and excitement. "My God, did you hear that? Who is she? She just ran away." Alistair Finch stood marooned in the center of the room, the architect of a moment that had spun catastrophically out of his control. The party he had meticulously planned to be a monument to his own sophistication had been hijacked. He was no longer the host. He was a footnote in a far more interesting story. His face cycled through a series of emotions, shock rage, and finally, a desperate scramble for control. "Well," he boomed, his voice straining to sound jovial and in charge. "A bit of unexpected drama. Our staff is clearly full of surprises. Let's have another round of drinks for everyone." But his attempt to reclaim the narrative was pathetic and transparent. No one was listening. The energy in the room had irrevocably shifted. The polite, vapid conversations about art and finance were replaced with urgent, excited chatter about the girl. The atmosphere was electric, with the thrill of having witnessed something raw and authentic, a stark contrast to Alistair's manufactured elegance. Harrison Sterling walked directly up to Alistair, his expression cold and severe. "Finch," he said, his voice low, but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. "Who was that young woman?" Alistair flinched. "Sterling, just a bit of fun. A waitress, as you saw." "I did not see a waitress," Sterling corrected him, his voice like chipping ice. "I saw a pianist with a level of talent and emotional depth I have not encountered in a decade. A pianist who, I might add, played with the ghost of a Juilliard inflection in her phrasing. So I will ask you again, who is she, and what is the name of your catering company?" Before Alistair could formulate a response, Isabella Rossi joined them, her eyes blazing with contempt. She had draped a cashmere wrap over her stained dress, but her composure was gone. "That wasn't fun, Alistair," she snapped. "That was cruel. You tried to humiliate that girl. You bullied her into a performance for your own amusement." She looked at him with a dawning look of disgust, as if seeing him for the first time. "I thought you were merely ambitious. I didn't realize you were a sadist. Don't call my gallery again." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving a stunned Alistair in her wake. Her departure was a signal. The spell was broken. Other guests, seeing a titan of the art world pass judgment, began to collect their things. The party was dying not with a gentle fade, but with a sudden fatal hemorrhage. Alistair's bid for acceptance into the city's cultural heart had not just failed, it had spectacularly backfired, exposing him as classless and cruel. Meanwhile, in the service corridor, Ellie's sobs subsided into ragged, exhausted breaths. A hand touched her shoulder, and she flinched, scrambling backward. It was Maria, her co-worker and roommate, her face etched with concern. "Ellie, my God, are you okay? I heard. Everyone is talking." Maria knelt beside her, wrapping a comforting arm around her. I don't even have words for what that was. It was like watching a ghost come back to life. "I shouldn't have done it," Ellie whispered, her voice raw. "I can't go back there. I can't." "You don't have to," Maria said fiercely. "Let's get you out of here. We'll use the service elevator. To hell with Alistair Finch. To hell with this whole party." As Maria helped a trembling Ellie to her feet, the door to the salon swung open. It was Mr. Sterling. He looked at Ellie, his expression softening, with a gentle paternal concern. "Young lady," he began, his voice kind. "Are you all right? My name is Harrison Sterling. What you did in there, it was extraordinary." Ellie shrank back, intimidated and overwhelmed. "Please just leave me alone." "I only want to talk," he said softly. "A talent like yours, it doesn't just disappear. I feel I know your technique. It is reminiscent of a very dear old friend and colleague of mine, a professor, Daniel Albright." At the mention of that name, a fresh wave of pain washed over Ellie. She stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. How could this man know him? Before she could answer, Peterson, Alistair's assistant, burst into the hallway. "There you are, Mr. Finch demands to see you." The mention of Alistair's name was like a cattle prod. Ellie's flight instinct took over completely. "I have to go," she said, her voice panicked. She grabbed Maria's hand. "Now!" She bolted down the hallway toward the service elevator, Maria in tow, leaving a frustrated Peterson and a deeply intrigued Harrison Sterling standing in the corridor. Sterling watched her flee, a look of profound sadness and determination on his face. He now had a name, Daniel Albright. It was a breadcrumb, a vital clue in a mystery he was now determined to solve. The story of the Angel of the Apex spread through the city's elite circles like wildfire. By morning, it was more than just gossip. It was a legend. Cell phone videos of the performance, grainy and with distorted audio, began to surface online. They were poor quality, but they captured the raw energy, the shocked faces of the crowd, and the explosive ovation. The story was irresistible: the billionaire bully and the secret prodigy. Blogs and society columns picked it up. Finch's Folly Moguls Party ends in humiliation after Waitress outshines host, read one headline. Who is the mystery pianist who silenced New York's elite? Asked another. Alistair Finch woke up to a public relations nightmare. His attempt at social climbing had turned into a public execution of his character. He was a meme, a villain in a real-life fairy tale. His investors were calling, not to congratulate him, but to ask about his judgment. His first instinct was to crush the story. He had his legal team send cease and desist letters to the blogs. He leaned on his contacts at affairs of elegance, demanding the waitress's name and address, intending to buy her silence with a non-disclosure agreement and a hefty check. But the catering company, fearing a lawsuit and bad press, stonewalled him, claiming employee privacy. The more he tried to suppress the story, the more it grew. He had wanted to be the talk of the town. Now he was, but, for all, the wrong reasons. His cruelty, not his wealth, was his defining characteristic. The ripple effect of his casual malice was turning into a tsunami, and it was heading straight for him. The days that followed the gala were a blur of anxiety for Ellie. She and Maria had slipped out of the Apex Tower and taken the subway back to their cramped Brooklyn apartment, the glittering world of the penthouse feeling like a distant, feverish dream. Ellie had immediately called the catering company, quitting her job before they could fire her. She couldn't bear the thought of facing her former manager, of answering questions, of reliving that night. She unplugged from the world, ignoring the buzzing of her phone, refusing to look at the news. But the world had a way of seeping in. Maria would come home from her shifts. She hadn't quit, defiantly telling Ellie that, "We need the money and I'm not letting that bastard win," with updates. "You're all over the internet, you know," she said one evening, scrolling through her phone as Ellie sat, huddled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. "They're calling you the phantom pianist. People are trying to find you. The videos have millions of views." Ellie flinched. "I don't want to be found." "Why not?" Maria pressed gently. "Ellie, what you did. It was incredible. You have a gift. You can't keep it buried forever." "You don't understand, Maria." Ellie whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "That piano. It wasn't a stage. It was a courtroom. And I was confessing. Every note was about him, about the accident. Playing again didn't free me. It just showed me how locked up I still am." The performance had dredged up everything she had tried to suppress. Her nights were filled with nightmares of the crash, the cacophony of screeching metal and shattering glass, the awful silence that followed. During the day, she was haunted by Professor Albright's memory. She saw him everywhere, in the slant of the afternoon light, in the melody of a passing car's horn. She'd pull out her old photo albums, tracing the image of his kind, smiling face. He was in his late 50s when he died, a man whose entire life was an ode to music. He had taken her on as a student when she was 10, a shy, quiet girl with unusually large hands and a preternatural ability to understand harmony. He had been more of a father to her than her own, who had left when she was a child. He had nurtured her talent, prepared her for Juilliard's pre-college program, and believed in her with a faith that had once felt like a shield against the world. And she had been driving the night of the accident. It wasn't her fault. The police report was clear. A drunk driver had swerved into their lane, but that fact offered no comfort. Her last memory was of him turning to her, his face illuminated by the oncoming headlights, his mouth opening to say something she would never hear. She woke up in a hospital, her left hand in a cast, and the world irrevocably silent. Her grief and guilt had become intertwined, a toxic knot in her soul that had choked her music to death. Meanwhile, 2 men were searching for her, their methods vastly different. Alistair Finch was employing the brute force of his wealth. He hired a team of private investigators. "Find her," he commanded. "I don't care what it costs. I need to control this narrative." His plan was to offer Ellie an obscene amount of money. In exchange for a public statement, he would craft himself something about how he had discovered her and was sponsoring her talent. He would recast himself from bully to benefactor. It was a desperate, cynical ploy to salvage his scorched reputation. Harrison Sterling's search was more methodical, more heartfelt. He started with the name Ellie had inadvertently given him, Daniel Albright. He went through Juilliard's archives. The file was thick. Professor Daniel Albright had been one of the most respected piano instructors in the institution's history, known for his brilliant pedagogy and his devotion to his students. He had died 4 years ago in a car accident. Sterling read the old tributes, the obituaries, and then he found it. Listed among the survivors alongside Albright's distant relatives was his protégée and beloved ward, Eleanor Vance. The name hit Sterling like a thunderclap. Eleanor Vance. He remembered the name now vaguely. A decade ago she had been the star of the pre-college division, a prodigy of astonishing potential. Everyone had predicted a legendary career. Then, after Albright's death, she had simply vanished. She had withdrawn her application to the conservatory, stopped responding to calls, and disappeared from the music world completely. People assumed she was overcome with grief, that she had simply quit. No one knew the depth of her trauma, or that she had ended up serving cocktails in the same circles that had once prepared to worship her. Sterling felt a profound sense of responsibility. The music community had lost her once. He wouldn't let it happen again. He reached out to a few of Albright's old colleagues, piecing together fragments of Ellie's past. He learned she had no family in the city. He learned she had a close friend, another student who had also dropped out around the same time. But no one knew where she had gone. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A junior administrator at Juilliard overheard him making inquiries. The young man was a classical music aficionado and had been following the Phantom Pianist story online. "Mr. Sterling," he said tentatively, "I was watching one of the clearer videos from the party, the one a food blogger named Gourmet Guy NYC posted. At the very end, as the girl runs out, another waitress with dark curly hair calls her name. It's faint, but if you turn up the volume, you can hear her shout, 'Ellie!' The blogger's video was high definition. Sterling enhanced the audio. There it was, faint, but clear, Ellie. And the waitress who had shouted it was clearly visible. He made a call to the HR department at Affairs of Elegance. He didn't threaten or demand. He explained who he was, his connection to Professor Albright, and his deep, sincere concern for Eleanor Vance's well-being. He wasn't a billionaire trying to clean up a mess. He was a guardian of a legacy. Moved by his sincerity, the manager gave him a name, Maria Sanchez. He found her address in Queens, a walk-up apartment, modest but clean. He knew this was his one chance. He had to approach this carefully. He wasn't just trying to find a pianist. He was trying to reach a soul in hiding. He knocked on the door of apartment 4B. After a moment, it opened a crack. A young woman with dark curly hair and wary eyes peered out. Maria. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone defensive. "My name is Harrison Sterling," he said gently. "I believe you are friends with Eleanor Vance. Please don't be alarmed. I was a friend of Daniel Albright's. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to help." He saw the flicker of recognition and conflict in Maria's eyes. She knew this was a turning point. She could slam the door, protecting Ellie's solitude, or she could open it and let the music back in. The apartment door opened, stopped short by the security chain. Maria's eyes were narrowed, ready for a fight. "She's not speaking to anyone. My name is Harrison Sterling," the man said, his voice a calm anchor in their turbulent week. "I'm not a reporter. I was a friend of Daniel Albright's. He spoke of Eleanor often. He called her Elara." The use of the intimate nickname was a key turning a lock. It bypassed all of Maria's defenses. It was a password from a world of love and trust. She undid the chain and swung the door open. "Come in," she whispered. Sterling found Ellie huddled on the sofa, a ghost haunted by a memory. He didn't crowd her, but spoke from across the room with a gentle authority. "Eleanor, what happened in that penthouse? You were playing with Daniel's fire. I know because I saw him ignite it in you years ago. That fire is gone," she whispered, her voice raw. "It was extinguished in the crash. All that's left are the ashes." "No," Sterling said firmly. "The embers are still there. Daniel would not want his memory to be a cage for you. He would want it to be a key." He placed a folder on the coffee table. "The Albright Memorial Scholarship at Juilliard. It isn't a performance contract or a demand for a concert. It's an offer of a quiet room, a sanctuary with resources and therapists who understand. It's a chance to heal, to find the music again, without the noise of the past." His offer of a quiet room was shattered by a loud percussive banging on the front door. It was the sound of arrogance, an intrusion of the world they had been hiding from. Maria opened it to find Alistair Finch, flanked by lawyers, his face a mask of impatient ambition. "Enough games, Vance," Finch said, striding into the apartment as if he owned it. He snapped open a briefcase filled with cash. $1 million. That's my starting offer. We'll trademark Waitress Virtuoso. You'll be my discovery, the face of my new arts foundation. It's a brilliant narrative. He saw Ellie staring at him, her expression unreadable. He gestured to Sterling. "Listen, I'm sure this old gentleman has your best interests at heart, but he's offering you sentiment. I'm offering you the world." Ellie looked from the sterile stacks of money in the briefcase to the simple folder Mr. Sterling had offered. One was a price tag. The other was an invitation. One was an offer to buy a product. The other was an offer to help recover a person. "You're wrong, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute clarity. "He is offering me the world. You are just offering me its price." A slow smile, the first genuine smile in years, touched her lips. "You think you can buy my story, my pain and my talent, and repackage it for your own redemption. But some things are not for sale. My soul is one of them." She walked to the door and held it open. "Please leave my home." Alistair stood utterly dumbfounded. He was a man who understood only transactions, and he had just encountered a value system his wealth could not penetrate. Defeated not by anger, but by a quiet, unshakable dignity, he snapped his briefcase shut and left. Weeks later, sunlight streamed into a practice room at Juilliard. The city was a distant murmur. Ellie sat at a Steinway Grand, the polished keys cool beneath her fingers. There was no audience, no pressure, no ghost in the room. There was only a profound sense of peace. She lifted her hands and began to play a simple Bach prelude. The notes were not a storm of grief or a cry of defiance. They were clean, clear, and orderly. It was the sound of rebuilding, the sound of a new, different kind of silence, one filled not with absence, but with the limitless promise of the music to come. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth is never defined by our job title, our uniform, or the judgment of those who look down on us. It's a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and the way art can give a voice to our deepest pain and our greatest triumphs. A man like Alistair Finch believed his wealth gave him the power to break someone, but all he did was reveal a strength he could never comprehend. Ellie's journey shows us that true power isn't about controlling others. It's about reclaiming control of our own story on our own terms. It's about finding the courage to face our ghosts and turn our deepest wounds into our most beautiful music. If Ellie's journey from silence to symphony moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own hidden strength. These stories deserve to be heard. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story about the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.